He is the bread of life, the way, the truth, and the life. He is the true vine, the light of the world, the good shepherd, and the door. He is the resurrection and the life. He is I am.
Well, good morning, NorthPoint. If you have a Bible, go ahead and take it and turn to John chapter 11 this morning. You know, there's been a lot of things that we've been able to celebrate over the last month or so here. And if you just would think back to the last month with us, we've been able to celebrate moms on Mother's Day. Last week, we had a number of baptisms, people professing their faith in Jesus, and we got to celebrate that. We've got to celebrate with our new friends here today, being able to be with us and celebrating what God's doing in their lives. We're thankful for them. And lots of you have been celebrating graduates and grad parties and open houses, and some of you still planning for that, but that's sort of the season of celebrating those things. You know, part of our normal human experience is to celebrate, is to rejoice, is to be happy about these things. But there's also another experience that we have as humans that often contrasts with all of the joys and the celebrations we have, and that is loss. That a normal human experience is to deal with loss, and to deal with loss a lot, all the time, in fact. You can think about loss in terms of losing some measure of your health, or losing the ability to be able to do something. You know, increasingly for those of you that are getting older, which happens to be all of you are in some way, getting older, you start to lose out on things that you used to be able to do and that you can't do now anymore. Some of you have significantly had health issues that put you in a place where you've lost a significant portion of your mobility or your abilities to do things. If you've ever moved from one place to another, maybe you're excited about that move, but you also recognize moving from one place to another, it means losing out on a sense of place and sometimes relationships, because you're really not able to maintain all of those relationships you had in another place. And of course, there's the big ones that we face in our lives, the loss of people that are close to us, loved ones that are dear to us. In fact, tomorrow we will observe Memorial Day. And Memorial Day is a holiday that is designed to help us to remember the losses that we have faced and things that have got us, people that have got us to the place that we are at now, that people that are no longer with us anymore. In fact, you could think about, as humans, even in the midst of our celebrations, there is a lot of loss that's mixed in with those celebrations. So when you graduate from high school, that's a really super exciting thing, but it also means the loss of high school. You don't get to do that anymore, right? And as you graduate and you get finished with college and you get finished with trade school, or you get into a career, you lose out on this very important thing, which is summer break. Like, do you remember the very first time when you had to adult during summer and you were like, wait a minute, I should at least get 2 weeks that I can sleep in and do absolutely nothing. But no, you're like, I'm an adult now and I've lost out on that. Having a child or adopting and welcoming a child into your home is one of the biggest celebrations that we have. And yet it also comes with some measure of loss, right? I mean, you're gonna lose just this relationship with your spouse in some way or a certain amount of time. And you certainly are gonna lose sleep when you invite a child into your home as well. So even our celebrations, they have a sense of loss that goes along with them. This week in our community and in the life of our church, a lot of people have faced loss. And you have times like this that just happen, and in the sovereignty of God, he knew, from before he created the world, that we would talk about John chapter 11 this morning. And he also knew that this week would be a week where at least 2 different men from our church would lose their fathers. A family would be dealing with a suicide. A dear young family, a young mother of 4 children, 4 years old and under, would lose her life this week as well. Another person in our church would lose a mentor that's close to them. There's someone in Ohio that I was very close to that he's battling pancreatic cancer and probably isn't gonna make it. And I imagine there's lots of other stories of loss that those of you that are here today and those of you watching online are facing for yourselves right now. I wanna ask you, what have your losses been lately? The personal ones that you have been feeling and that you've been dealing with. Those losses could even relate to what COVID has taken from us over the past year or so. The loss of rites of passage, the loss of celebrations, the loss of health, the loss of life For sure, the loss of a job, the loss of finances, the loss of just being able to interact with and see and be around people. What losses have you been dealing with? There's this game that my family likes to play called Monopoly Deal. And it's a lot better than regular Monopoly because regular Monopoly can take like about 3 years to get through. And it's like, does anybody actually ever win Monopoly? And you break the rules. Nobody follows the actual rules. You borrow money from the bank and all this. So Monopoly Deal is a much better alternative because it's a card game and you can play it in like 15 to 20 minutes. It's really great. My girls like to play it. And the point of this card game is to get 3 property sets. And so it's kind of similar to Monopoly. You're trying to gather properties, and once you gather 3 property sets, then you win the game. Now, there's money cards that are in here, and then there's also special cards that allow you to do certain things to your opponents. The most important card in Monopoly Deal is this card right here called the Deal Breaker card. It's the most valuable card. And with the Deal Breaker card, you can lay that on any opponent, and you can say to your opponent, I'm taking an entire set of your cards. Very valuable card, right? It could help you pretty easily to win the game, especially if you get a couple Deal Breaker cards and you just steal other people's entire property sets and win the game. But there is one card that beats out the Deal Breaker card, and it is this card, it is this card right here. It is the Just Say No card. So if somebody lays a Deal Breaker card on you to steal your property set and you happen to have a Just Say No card in your hand, you can slap that Just Say No card down and say, no, you are not taking my entire property set, and you can block them from trying to win the game. Now, if the person that laid the Deal Breaker card also has a Just Say No card, they can just say no, you're Just Say No. And then if you happen to have one more Just Say No card, you can just say no, the Just Say No of your Just Say No of their Deal Breaker card or whatever, right? There's only 3 Just Say No cards though, so this can't go on endlessly. It can only go on for a little while. Here's the thing for most of us is that I think when it comes to grief and losses in our lives, we're carrying the Just Say No card around in our pocket. And when emotions and the feelings about loss come into our lives, we just say no it. And when I'm starting to feel bad about that, and I think I might just get too messed up on this, I just say no it. And if tears start to come to our eyes, we're no, get back up in there, tear, right? We are not going there. It's not tough. It's not strong. Maybe I'm not showing faith. And I just say no my emotions, especially when it comes to grief and loss, all the time. And then we open the Bible to John chapter 11 and verse 35, and we read the shortest verse in the entire Bible. Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Maybe that means there's something that we need to learn about grief and sorrow and loss. That instead of pushing it out and just saying no to it, maybe we need to embrace it. Today, Jesus is going to show us how to deal with loss in our lives. And he does this by interacting with a family that he was very close to. The family is made up of 2 sisters, Mary and Martha, and a brother named Lazarus. They live in a town called Bethany, which is about 2 miles outside of the capital city of Jerusalem. Jesus is a couple days' journey away from them in another town when he gets word that Lazarus, the brother, is sick and is not doing very well. And notice how Jesus receives this news in John 11 and verse 4. When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." And we're like, oh, good, okay. This is not too bad of a deal. He's sick, but he's gonna be okay. Verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." Now that's kind of weird. I mean, there's some good news for us in that, right? This sickness isn't gonna end in death. Oh good, Jesus is gonna take care of it. Everything's gonna be okay. But then it says, when he heard that he was sick, he waited. He loves him, but he waited to go see him. That doesn't exactly make sense to me, right? It would be kind of like saying to your spouse, "Hey honey, I love you so much. I'm not gonna buy you anything for our anniversary." Wait, like, well, I don't follow your logic. That doesn't really go. And that's what this sounds like here. And then Jesus says, okay, now we are gonna go. Well, the story goes on that his disciples push back on him. And like, Jesus, you can't go to Jerusalem right now. Around that area, people are trying to kill you. You don't really want to risk your life and put your life on the line for this. We don't need to go there. They're scared about that. And then Jesus responds to this by telling them something about the daylight and the nighttime, and you work during the day, and they're confused and they have no idea what he's talking about. It just doesn't make any sense to them. So then he says to them, Lazarus is asleep and I need to go wake him up. And they're like, well, if he's asleep, then somebody else can wake him up. It doesn't sound like it's a job for the Messiah to have to go to wake somebody up from a nap, right? So I think he's gonna be okay. And apparently his disciples never had teenagers that were sleeping in on Saturday morning. Or otherwise they would realize it sometimes does take an act of God to wake a teenager up, right? So maybe Jesus does need to go wake Lazarus up. Eventually Jesus says to them, no, I was using a figure of speech. Lazarus is actually dead. He's no longer alive and we need to go to him. Look at verse 14. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. Remember, this is what Jesus is always doing. In verse 4, he said, God's working through this. I'm in charge. I've got this covered. This is going to be for God's glory. And now he tells us another thing. I'm always working so that you will believe in me, so that you will trust me, and you're going to see something absolutely amazing. But now we need to go to him. God is always working, but it can be a little bit hard to see sometimes, because notice how Thomas responds, verse 16. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus. Didymus means twin. So for all of you multiples that are out there, Thomas is your guy. Like, he's your follower of Jesus, which maybe you're not gonna like in a second after you see what he says. So Thomas said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go with him that we may die with him. Wah, wah, wah. You know, Thomas, he's the downer of the party, man. We call him, from later in the Gospels, we call him Doubting Thomas, and Thomas seemed to have a kind of a melancholy personality, and he's kind of the party pooper, like, I guess we just might as well go and die with Jesus as well, find this is what's gonna happen. And yet, death was a real possibility, both for Jesus and for his followers. So they have cause to be concerned. And they're probably thinking in their minds, like, Lazarus is dead already. Jesus, why do you have to go there just for a funeral? You don't need to risk your own life just to go to this person's funeral. These disciples, they're confused and they're unsettled, trying to reconcile the whole situation. And this helps us to acknowledge the first thing that you and I need to see about loss. It's this, that loss is confusing and unsettling. It is very confusing, and it is also unsettling to us. We see that from the disciples here. I mean, just think about what's happened so far. Jesus says Lazarus' sickness won't end in death, and then what happens? Lazarus dies. Jesus loves Lazarus, but he waits to go see him. He confuses his followers by saying that Lazarus is asleep when Lazarus is actually dead, and he doesn't go early to keep Lazarus from death, but now he wants to risk his own life in order to go to the funeral. You can see why they would be disoriented with the whole thing, why they're confused, why they don't understand what Jesus is doing. And look, friends, that's exactly what loss is like. It doesn't make sense. It messes with you. It's not easy to understand and figure out. So think about a loss that you have recently faced. Okay, and I really want you to get one in your mind. What's some loss that you are dealing with right now? Or perhaps there is a big one from your past that you have dealt with, and it recycles. It comes up, and it's not one that it's one you learn to live with, but you have to deal with it regularly. It comes up. Maybe the loss of someone that was very close to you. Or it could be an inability to do something, or some portion of your life that you lost, or a relationship that you lost. It's hard to think about that thing, right? And it's hard even now, probably looking back on it, to understand why exactly it happened, where you go from here. You probably still have questions about it, doubts about it. There's probably pieces of it you're wondering about. I bet there's parts of it that are still not fully resolved. Loss can feel to us like anything from sadness to fear to anger to just plain confusion. Your mind tries to understand and rationalize what has happened and make sense of it, but your heart pulls you in all different directions. You know the feeling that I'm talking about? And if you do, you're in good company. It means that you're human, because loss will always feel confusing and unsettling. But don't run from it. Don't play the just say no card on it because it's confusing and unsettling. If you've ever been confused by loss, or you've maybe even questioned why God has allowed something or what he is doing, if you've ever thought that you weren't strong enough or brave enough, or ever thought in yourself, I don't think I'm gonna make it through this, then you're in good company. Because you notice here that even with all of the confusion and the emotion from the very beginning, Jesus is there. Jesus is there loving the people he has created. He's loving his friends. He is speaking truth into the situation. He is leading from the front. You may not always know what he means. You may not always understand what is going on. You may wrestle with doubt. In fact, you will wrestle with doubt and uncertainty. But you know that he is present with you. And he's about to be with Mary and Martha in their time of greatest need. Notice what happens when Jesus arrives in Bethany in verse 20. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. See, Martha was a good Jew, and all good Jews believed that there would be a resurrection. That is, that we as humans are created of immaterial and material part. We have a soul and we have a body. And when you die physically in this life, your soul lives on for eternity, and one day your body will be reunited with your soul, right? You will have a body for all of eternity. That's the second resurrection, right? You're gonna come back. And Martha's like, yeah, I believe that in the end, it will be put together. I'm gonna see Lazarus again in the end. And all people will either be with God or separated from God. I think Lazarus, he's a Jew, he's gonna be with God. I'm gonna be with God, so I know I'll see him. That's what Martha is intending here. And Jesus looks her in the eye and says to her, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you're the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. You can see in her answer, it seems confidence, but it might be, yes. Yeah, Lord, I know, but she's still a little confused. She still doesn't fully understand. Verse 28, after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said the same thing Martha said. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him, he asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. Now look, Jesus' I am statement in verse 25 is the heart of this text. When Jesus looks at Martha and says, Martha, here's what you gotta get. Me, Jesus, standing with you, I am resurrection. I am life. Everything you need is right here, and I am with you. And the paradox that if you believe in me, you're actually never gonna die. You're just gonna pass from this life into the next, always in my presence, always in the presence of God. Martha, this is what you need. It's an anchor for your soul. It's your greatest hope in the midst of the time of your greatest loss. Cling to me and trust in me. Yes and amen, we say to that. Through faith in Jesus, we never die. That's the big thing. For all the loss and sorrow of this life, we know there's a new life with no pain and no more loss where everything will be made right. We need that hope. But I want you to notice something else in the story. And it's Jesus's two very different responses to these two women. Did you pick up on this reading through it? Now, both Martha and Mary approached Jesus with the same somewhat accusatory question, right? Statement. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. They say that. But looking deeper, we can see very different emotional states in these two women. Martha comes to meet Jesus outside of the village, is anxious to see him. Mary doesn't seem to be able to get up and to leave the house at first. Martha adds to her statement, Jesus, even know I know that whatever you ask from God, he will give to you. She has more hope than Mary has. Martha stands to speak to Jesus. Mary just falls down exhausted at his feet. Two sisters, same home, same experience of loss, different emotional responses that elicit from Jesus a different response. It's the second thing that we see about loss. Loss produces different emotional states in people. requiring different responses. Martha is sad, but she seems to be more cognitive about it, right? We think that Martha was probably, she's probably the firstborn in the family. And as the firstborn, that they don't seem to have other parents around. She seems to be the one mostly responsible. And she's like, I gotta keep it together. I gotta be rational about this. I'm sorrowing as well. I'm gonna talk to Jesus, but we've gotta make a plan and we've gotta move forward. And she seems to be a little bit more emotionally, in a place where she's ready to move forward. And what do we have to do here? Mary, on the other hand, is crumbling. It's all emotion. She can barely stand. Look, here's what you gotta get. There is no universal manual of emotional responses in loss, right? You can't say in your mind, hey, if you really feel it, if you're really dealing with this well, you will fill in the blank. Like what? You will what? What will people do? What will your spouse do? What will your kids do? Cry? Maybe? Yell? Scream? Get angry? Eat a pint of ice cream? Okay, yes, check that one. Yes, that is a universal, maybe. No, I don't know. What do you have to do? I did an oil change on my daughter's car this past week, and when I got done doing it, it's one of those that has the percentage gauge for the oil, and it gets down, and then you have to reset it back up to 100. So when I get done, I'm like, how did I do this before? I don't know. I'm like, I gotta open up the manual. So I look up at the manual, I find the page. Those things are like 500 pages long, so it takes a while to find the right page. You finally find the page, and it says, okay, go to this menu, click this button, scroll down, enter this, hold this for 10 seconds, and then the gauge will reset. And it's like, I like that. I like just do this step, this step, this step. It's very logical. It's very clear. You probably like things like that in your life. It's very clear. You get the result you want by doing the process that it says to do. Now look, it doesn't care what I feel about the oil change gauge. No one cares what my feelings are or how I feel that the dealership should make this car to work or what the menu should work like. I'm not just gonna pray over the oil change. I just gotta do the thing it told me to do and it's gonna get done. We love it when things work like that. Grief is not like that. There's no manual. There's no easy steps. There's no super logical process. It happens exactly like this. As my mom has gone through her cancer battle that I've shared with you a bit, I'm trying to be honest with myself and my own feelings about that and deal with that and let those come out, while at the same time recognizing that I live in a home with 6 other females who I also want them to process it in their way, in their time. I don't want them to stuff it. I don't want them to play the just say no card and say, no, this isn't happening, that's not going on at all. But I also want them to be able to respond to it in the way that they are wired and in the moments, how they feel, whatever they feel, when they feel it. There is no universal manual for emotional responses in grief. I often tell families that I meet with when they suffer through a loss, in that to allow space for each other to be able to grieve and to struggle through it in the way that they need to, but be really careful about looking at others and kind of condemning them for not dealing with it the way that you are, for putting your own process of grief upon them and kind of saying, well, if you really felt it, you would be doing this. Or you don't really feel it like I feel it. And then you get into this thing about being upset at each other for how you're handling it. Look, we have to deal with it. We have to let it come out. But I think that this is even true that we have different emotional responses because you have different emotional responses from moment to moment when you suffer loss, from day to day. One day you wake up or one time you're thinking about it, and you're like, okay, I can do this. We can handle this. And the next moment you're a mess and you're crying. So if that's true about yourself, in your own heart, that's gonna be true for others as well. Sometimes you feel like Mary, and sometimes you feel like Martha. Here's the good news, no matter what your emotional state is, Jesus meets you where you are. Did you see this? When Jesus meets with Martha and he sees her, she comes outside of the village with seemingly a little bit more confidence and a little bit of an accusing Jesus and yet saying, I know I'm trusting in you. Jesus just looks her in the eye and he says to her, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Believe in me. We've got this. I am here with you. Trust me, we can do that. She receives that truth from Jesus. And when Jesus meets with Mary, he doesn't even say a word. He just is with her. And he walks with her to the tomb and he lets his own emotions come out alongside of her. Look, in loss, sometimes you need a reminder of truth and sometimes you just need someone to cry with. Right? So sometimes you need a reminder of truth for sure, anchor your soul, but sometimes you just need someone to be with you. I mean, we cling to the hope that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. But sometimes you just need a hug. We need someone who has been there. We need someone to mourn with us. In fact, did you pick up on this in verse 31? It talks about these mourners that went out with Mary when she finally did leave the house. Did you know in this day that Jews would hire professional mourners? So those mourners may have been some community people and maybe some other family members, but you would pay. You valued it so much, the need to grieve and to sorrow and to do that with people, you would pay people to come in and be professional mourners. And you didn't just mourn for a day. This was at least a week long, up to 30 days of a mourning period for people to be with you in your grief, to make sure that you're processing it and you're working through it. And look, if this is what you need, people to cry with you, to be with you, and at the appropriate time point you to Jesus, it's also a good reminder for how we need to care for people in their grief. Like we can read the room, right? We don't have to think, man, I gotta get this verse in there so that they will just trust Jesus and stop crying, as if crying is a bad thing. Maybe you've heard me say this before. There's times when I've been at funerals and I'll ask people, hey, how are they doing? How are you doing? And like, oh, she's not doing very well. She's really losing it. She's crying just so hard and she's really having a hard time. And I kind of think to myself, maybe she's doing better than everybody else because she's dealing with her emotions, because he's letting it come out with people around others. Look, even when Jesus gave Martha the truth that he gave to her, he did it face to face, and I imagine with great affection in his eyes, and pleaded with her, Martha, I'm here, I'm with you. Believe me, trust me. Never underestimate the power of your presence with someone in their grief. And sometimes if you've done this, you know it is awkward. It's weird. And sometimes it's silent, and sometimes, I'm a pastor, and sometimes I'm sitting there going, dear Jesus, please, I do not know. Help me not to say something stupid, and help me to know what to say, right? Because I don't just want to slap a Bible verse on it. Here's your Band-Aid, everything's gonna be fine now. We believe all of this truth. We need this truth for sure. But Jesus doesn't speak a word to Mary. He's just with her in all of that. Never underestimate the power of your presence in someone's grief. Be there. Speak a word of hope if that seems appropriate, and just be with them. Friends, we have to allow for grief in ourselves and in others. We have to embrace the sorrow, the unsettledness, and the dark night of the soul, which is the next thing we see from Jesus about handling loss. Losses must be grieved so they don't create greater loss. Our losses have to be grieved so they don't create greater loss. Again, we like to do this. Like some of you, you've got a deck full of just say no cards in your pocket. And whenever the emotion or the feelings, especially if tears come, oh my goodness, that is not manly, you know? Like, and maybe some of that comes from your dad, or you were raised in a way that said, we don't cry about things. We just get up, you suck it up, you put a Band-Aid or two on it, and you just keep going. Maybe it could have been that too. And so you've got this deck of just say no cards, and you just are ready to play them all the time. Some of you, you've probably gotten so used to doing it, you don't even know you're doing it anymore. And maybe you give grief just a little bit of time, but you don't really give it the time that it needs. But again, check this out, John 11:35. Jesus, God in human form, wept. He wept. Now that begs a question if you're thinking, did Jesus really mean it? Like, is he doing this for show? Is he just doing it to try to identify with Mary and Martha and show the rest of the people that he's around that he's sorrowful, like he made the tears come? I mean, after all, not to give the story away, but he's about to raise Lazarus from the dead. And he knows that he's gonna bring Lazarus back to life, so is he just sort of faking this for everybody else's benefit? Well, there's a few clues that help us to answer that question. Look at verse 33. It says this, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Verse 35, Jesus, it doesn't say he cried. The word is wept, and the Greek word that is used here by John conjures up an undignified kind of crying. And the image is of a horse snorting. The word is horse snorting. That's what Jesus is doing here. God in the flesh, completely undignified, where people might have been like, especially if it's American culture, maybe not this culture, but in American culture, it'd be like that, oh, the person's like, there is something wrong. That is weird. Get that person a tissue, right? Like this is craziness. That's the word that John uses on purpose. And then verse 38, Jesus once more deeply moved. The emotions are from deep within him. These are legitimate. This is legitimate grief. And imagine the grief that Jesus was feeling in that moment. What was he feeling? I mean, he just has lost a close friend, whose sisters are heartbroken. The community around him is in great pain. But also, as the creator of all things, he is grieved over what sin has done to people in general. He knows that it was sin that's brought about death. The only reason that we have this going on in the first place is because people have rebelled against God and said, no, I'll do life my own way. And so that sin creates not only physical death, where all people who are born in this world will die, but it also creates spiritual death, where we as human beings are separated from God because we say we want to do things our own way. One writer says that Jesus in this moment is sorrowing and grieving over death, big D death and little d death. Little d death in everybody's life, their physical life will be lost, but also big D death as in separation from God and all the pain and the suffering and the struggle that sin has created in this world. That's what Jesus sees in that moment. And he also sees one other thing. As the Savior of the world, he knows what it will cost him to reverse all of that. He knows that it will cost him his life in order to put things back to the way that they are supposed to be. When Jesus says to Martha, I am the resurrection, what do you have to do first to resurrect? What does Jesus have to do to be the resurrection? He's got to die. You have to have a death before a resurrection. And so Jesus knows all of that. And in that moment, I think sitting there looking, saying, I am the life, he knows in order to get there, he would have to give up his life. He sorrows as all this crashes down upon him, what his friends have lost, what all people have lost, and what he would have to lose to make it right. Jesus wept. And friends, you need to weep too. Maybe literal tears, but at the least you must embrace grief as a way to deal with your loss. Now I know that for a lot of us, we have a deck full of excuses. Now I've alluded to these already, but let's just point them out. I know that for a lot of you, you carry this, we carry this trump card. I'll say we, because I'm in this too, okay? We carry the trump card of just say no, that's the big one. But we also have a deck full of other excuses as well, right, that we like to play. Some of these are cultural excuses that we've all just sort of bought into, and we just sort of said, yeah, that's true, that's right. And so let's just name them. Sometimes you name things and you say them, they start to lose some of their power, and you begin to acknowledge them. So I'm just gonna call this our avoiding grief excuse deck, right, that we just sort of go through. The first one is this: we might say to ourselves, well, it's just weak. When if I cry, if I'm kind of losing it, if I'm really dealing with it, it's just weak. I've got to be a strong person, so I can't project weakness by really grieving. I tell myself that I should keep busy, right? When hard things come and loss happens, I just got to keep working. I got to keep doing things. I got to keep my schedule busy so that I don't think about it too much. I'll just keep going with it. I'll just keep doing it. What are the distractions that I can have to put into my life to just keep moving forward? I tell myself it's too hard. And it is. It is really hard. But I might tell myself if I actually give time to think about this and to process it, it will be too hard and I won't be able to recover from it. I tell myself it just makes it worse. When I start thinking about it, I just get into a worse place, and I don't want those feelings. I don't want to allow those feelings to come in a little bit and me to have to deal with those things because it might make me cry, it might make me lose it might make me look like I'm not strong, so I just don't even want to go there. I tell myself that I can handle it on my own and play that card, right? I can just deal with this. I don't want to put it on anybody else. I'll take a little bit of time, I'll take a half a day off work, I'll think about it a little bit, and then someday later on, when other people aren't around and they don't have to deal, I'll just deal with it on my own. And then I tell myself maybe it's selfish or unspiritual. It shows a lack of faith. I mean, if I'm really grieving, I'm really sorrow, it might mean I don't believe that Jesus is enough. It might mean that I don't believe that I'm gonna make it to heaven and everything's gonna be all right someday. And so I just gotta show strong faith by not crying and not really going through this grief process. I know there's some truth in every single one of these things, and I know that you feel this way, but Jesus wept with you, with others. And if Jesus wept, the manliest, strongest man ever to live on the face of this earth, weeps and weeps with you. Are you grieving your losses? You know, when we suppress or we ignore our grief, the lie that all of these things tell us is that it will go away. And it doesn't go away. Grief doesn't go away. It just changes forms and it reappears in your life in other ways. Do you know this? Tish Harrison Warren, who's an Anglican priest, writes in her book, Prayer in the Night, she says this: if we do not make time for grief, it will not simply disappear. Grief is stubborn. It will make itself heard, or we will die trying to silence it. If we don't face it directly, it comes out sideways in ways that aren't always recognizable as grief. It may come out as explosive anger or uncontrollable anxiety. It could come out as compulsive shallowness or brooding bitterness or unchecked addiction. Grief is a ghost that can't be put to rest until its purpose has been fulfilled. Have you ever thought that maybe your anger is actually grief in disguise? Have you ever thought that your closed offness is actually ungrieved loss? Or that your depression maybe stems from putting off grief? Or that the drugs, alcohol, gambling, or work addiction may actually be a substitute for grieving in your life? You know, I've told you before that I'm not an overly emotional person. Like, my personality in general tends to be straight, no chaser. You know, it's just like if you looked at my emotional temperament on a scale, it would be like this. You know, sometimes really happy, you know, sometimes, you know, discouraged, but like more so like this. I don't have like big mood swings. That's just how I'm wired. But I don't know that that's always been good for me. Over the past few years or so, I've been trying to, be a little bit more honest and open with my emotions and feelings and letting some of those things come out. You know, like you, my wife and I, we've dealt with a decent amount of loss in our lives. We lost our first child to a miscarriage. And I know I always talk about the 5 girls that we have, and that's amazing in a big family. But when you lose your first child, you don't know if you'll be able to have any more. You don't know what the future, you don't know what that looks like. So there's that. We've moved a few different places, and while we've always sort of been excited about that, or mostly been excited about that, especially coming to Iowa, you leave people behind, and you leave place, and you leave memories. Our girls have struggled with, no, we don't want to leave our house, we don't want to leave that. You know, you have that thing that you deal with loss. My wife, Michelle, many of you know, lost her colon 2 years ago, and a few years ago now, and lost a couple of years of her life in the formative years of our daughters, right? We lost that. As a pastor, we deal with a lot of loss for people all the time. Almost every week is helping someone through some kind of loss and dealing with that. We've lost a lot of loved ones in the last few years. So at least for me, I'm just sharing with you, instead of trying to always hold the tears in, I'm trying to be a little bit more comfortable letting them come, being a little bit more willing to sit in the confusion and the uncertainty of loss, sharing with others a little bit more about what I feel. When my wife says to me, what are you feeling? Instead of me saying, I'm feeling like I want a burrito, I say, no, I'm like, I don't know, I'm not feeling anything. And then she's like, no, and then she probes a little more. I'm like, oh, like I'm actually really, really sad about that. And I didn't realize that I was. It's good that you ask. And I might push back on you a little bit and not want to answer, but it's deep in there somewhere. And it's like you just have to let some of that come out. It's hard. It's uncomfortable. I'd rather be happy or do something fun. I really would. But Jesus is the most spiritual, manliest, strongest person ever to live. And he wept. He was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He must know something about the gift of grieving and how much we need it. Now you might say, okay, well, how do I grieve? Like, what am I supposed to do? And I don't have enough time to answer that question fully today, but I've got 2 things for you quick. One is this summer we're going to do a Psalm series, 2 months in the Psalms. I think that'll help. But the other thing is, just let me give you a couple of things real quick. I'm going to do this super fast. But how do you grieve? First, you have to acknowledge that you've had a loss. It starts with that. Acknowledge it. Say it. Speak it. Write it. Tell somebody about it. Express it verbally. Secondly, use some tools. There are some great tools God's given us. Journaling, writing, music maybe that connects with you, that you could sit with some songs and listen to those and process what you're feeling, what your emotions are. Speak to somebody else about it. Prayer before God. Pray to God about it. Express it to him. Open up the book of Psalms or another passage of Scripture. Use some of those tools. Learn about grief. This is really good to do when you're not in grief. And when you are in grief, it can be extra helpful as well. Learn about the stages of grief. Learn about what grief is like. Learn about how to walk through it and to work through it. Learn some things about yourself and about grief. Don't bypass grief observances. This is funerals and ceremonies and visitations. Every once in a while, somebody who tells me, they're like, yeah, we lost such and such in our family, and we're not gonna do a visitation or memorial or graveside. They didn't really want that, and we don't really wanna do that. And I try not to show them my surprise, but I'm like, whoa, no. You've got to, you have to do something. Don't deny that you need that. And if you don't have a grief observance related to some of your loss, make one up, like create something. When my family left Ohio to move here 7 years ago, the church paid for a videographer to follow us around the town for a couple of hours and to shoot us in our favorite restaurants and with some of our favorite people in our favorite locations so that we could say goodbye well to where we were and have memories of that place. That was a grief observance. I mean, we were joyful, but we're also sorrowful that we were leaving, right? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And then lastly, be open to counseling. Wise people seek counsel. And at some point in your life, every single person here needs to see a counselor. That could be a very close friend that you trust and that is wise, but there's also a need for professional counseling, for you to see and sit with somebody. And then one more thing, and it's our final point. Losses are too great for us. I mean, going through this message today, I think you realize, especially if you've allowed yourself to think about some losses that you face, you know it's too hard for you. It is too much. It's too much for us to bear. But Jesus is the resurrection and the life. This is the hope that anchors us. Look at how the story ends. Verse 38, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor. It's been 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you'll see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. What was Lazarus thinking? Like, where was he? I don't know where he was during this time. And he comes out like a mummy, like the guy's dead. Was he in heaven with God up in heaven? I don't know. And then all of a sudden he's like, I'm alive again. Oh my goodness, somebody is yelling at me. Lazarus, come up. It's like that teenager, like wrapped in his hoodie, and sweatpants under the covers. You're trying to wake him up, like, oh, what's going on? And Lazarus comes out. And Jesus says, take off the grave clothes. He's not dead any longer. And let him go. In this moment, so that others would believe in him, Jesus chose to raise Lazarus from the dead. Jesus can do whatever he wants to do. Jesus has that power, and it's awesome here. Could you imagine being there, dead 4 days, and the people are like, yeah, I don't think we want to open that tomb. I'm pretty sure you don't want to experience what's going to happen when we open that tomb, and then Jesus says, Lazarus, come out, and a dead man walks out of the tomb. But don't get wrapped up in the miracle. Jesus even says it. The miracle was done to help people believe in him. Who is Jesus? He's the one who loves Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and you. He's the one who is never surprised by loss, but is always there with you. He's the one who weeps and grieves over loss, and he is the ultimate resurrection and the life. Loss is too great for us to bear on our own. That's why Jesus took it upon himself on the cross. This resurrection of Lazarus, do you know it was like a teaser trailer for what was about to happen? One writer says that Jesus coming to Lazarus' funeral was like a summons to his own funeral because Jesus knew what was about to happen. It wouldn't be long before Jesus was in a tomb. And it wouldn't be but 3 days later when he would rise up, conquering sin and death in order to give us life. Here's how you can still hope in your grief. This is how you can make it through. Jesus is with you. And he is your resurrection and life. So maybe today, maybe this week, you can slide the Just Say No card into your pocket, and you can see the God who came down for you, to weep with you, to sorrow with you, to cry with you, and to be your resurrection and your life. He is your great hope. Would you pray with me?